Alright, so I don't really know where to begin with this video. I'll just say up front, this is pretty unscripted. We're just gonna get my raw thoughts on this. But today we're gonna be talking about Amazing Spider-Man number 875, or in this volume, I think volume 5, issue 74. And I have a lot of thoughts about it. Most of them are not going to be negative, and it's going to be full of spoilers. So if you have not read this book or you have not read this run, it will be full of spoilers, so I advise you not to watch this video right now. But yeah, before we begin, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Spread the channel around YouTube so I can get better in the algorithm. Alright, so now let's just get started. This book was just a clusterfuck, to be honest with you. It's a giant clusterfuck. Throughout this run, Nick Spencer's run on Amazing Spider-Man, we've had essentially the Kindred saga. As it says on the book, it's the epic conclusion of the Kindred saga. By the way, it's not epic. But we have, I guess, it's a new villain. At least we thought it was a new villain at the time. And the entire run was built on this mystery of the villain. And it was like, who was this villain? And then it was like, why are they doing what they're doing? Nick Spencer, I think, said in a quote, it's not about who Kindred is, it's about why they are doing things. And that was a big mystery that I think we still don't know by the end of this story. This book was supposed to really conclude everything, because we now know that afterwards, starting next week, at the time I'm recording this, Ben Reilly is going to be the new Spider-Man. It's going to be taking over the book for about 6 months, based off of what it says at the end of this book. I think it didn't conclude a lot. I guess I'll get more into specifics. So this book starts off with everybody getting together: Norman Osborn, Mary Jane Watson, Peter Parker, and the Kindreds. As we find out, there's 2 of them, which I guess we found out last issue in the big exposition dump and convoluted retcon of since past. But we have Gabriel and Sarah Stacy, who are or maybe aren't vessels for Harry Osborn. That's still very unclear, even when Mephisto explained things. And even when Norman explained things, it's still very convoluted. But we got pretty much, them all getting together. Norman explains, hey, like, these are, like, clones. They're not really Norman Osborn and Gwen Stacy's kids, which we found out last issue. We found out that Harry Lyman, or like the Harry we've seen since Brand New Day, is a clone, which I guessed would happen, and I'm fine with that. It makes sense. They're officially staying with the fact that the Harry Osborn we've known since the 1960s up until 1992, I want to say, is dead and has been dead this entire time. I'm fine with that. He went out in a heroic way, and I think it would have taken away if it was just him coming back from hell and turning evil. But afterwards, we got like the Kindreds fighting Peter, and they keep fighting and fighting and fighting for a lot of it. A lot of that. Norman Osborn, because he's still cleansed by the Sin Eater, is still very regretful about his actions in selling Harry's soul to Mephisto. Which is, it's a little weird to see, and I didn't expect Norman to stay like this for so long, but by the end of this book, it looks like he's, still in his regretful stage and is not going to be the Green Goblin, at least for a while, which is interesting how, he's pretty much just normal. I don't think we've had that in a while, unless you count, like, Norman Osborn being cured, during Superior Spider-Man. But yeah, we get the Kindreds fighting, and then we get Mephisto talking to Doctor Strange, and they pretty much just go over like, oh, well, who's gonna win this battle? Is Peter gonna win? Is Kindred gonna win? What's gonna happen to Harry's soul? Is Doctor Strange's soul gonna get taken? None of that fucking matters, to be honest with you. We pretty much get like them fighting, and then the building collapses, and Peter doesn't get back up. You know, he doesn't have the willpower. I will say this page was really cool, where Mary Jane is the one who saves Peter and like brings him out of the rubble, and we find out she was a champion for Peter, which, I mean, that's perfect, man. I mean, like, it's Mary Jane, that's his ride or die. I'm cool with that. But afterwards, we find out, like, okay, yeah, like, the Kindred's lost. They lost the battle, and they just die. Like, because they're clones, I guess, like, Mephisto's demonic power, what I guess we found out here, that Mephisto gave them his demonic powers to some extent, and that's why they were able to do all the bullshit they did, where they like killed Spider-Man numerous times throughout the run, and like he just kept getting resurrected, able to manipulate his dreams and enter his dreams and give him like bullshit dreams, like summon the Sinister Six and like use centipedes to control them, and all the crazy shit they were able to do. I guess it's just because Mephisto gave them their power. That's not completely explained, but that's just my take on it. And essentially, the Kindred just die. Gabriel and Sarah die, and afterwards we get Norman crying over, oh yeah, the Harry clone died too. Yeah, I forgot about that, because like I didn't feel shit, because I knew he was gonna die. Like, the moment you establish he was a clone, you knew he was gonna fucking die. Like, come on. Yeah, so like Harry clone is dead, which means Harry Osborn is officially like permanently dead, at least for now, unless they decide to retcon that and bring him back to life. Afterwards, I mean, we got the ending, which is Peter and Mary Jane like waking up in bed and like going for a swing and kissing, and like that's a happy ending, I guess. But let me really talk about why this shit is just complete bullshit. The problem here is the amount of build-up Nick Spencer's been having throughout this entire series. Since the very first issue he started writing this book, he's been building up one more day, and potentially either recognizing it and having a resolution to that story, or retconning it in some fashion, like he did for Sins Past in the second to last issue of his series. The problem is that he didn't do that. We literally set up multiple times in this series that Peter was going to propose to Mary Jane. And I don't think this is necessarily Nick Spencer's fault. Now, the problem here is that Nick Spencer has left Marvel. Nick Spencer is gone to Substack and is working there now. And we found out that was announced like months ago. And apparently Chip Zdarsky, who worked on a Spectacular Spider-Man for some time, he said in an interview that Nick Spencer left months ago, like months earlier than people think he did, which makes me think, and I could kind of tell while reading this comic, that it doesn't really fit with the way Nick Spencer was writing dialogue for characters, particularly like Peter and Mary Jane. They had good dialogue, but the way they were talking didn't sound like how Nick Spencer had his characters talk before. And I think that Christos Gage, who is also given credit here for writing on the book, I think he did most of the writing here, and I think he's been doing that for a little bit longer than people think he has, because I think Nick Spencer might have left earlier than the general public think. And I think that has to do with Substack, and I think that has to do, possibly, this is just speculation, that Editorial got involved in this story and kind of shut it down. And what I mean by that is, I think they didn't want him retconning one more day, because that's been like a mandate since 2006, 2007, and they don't want Peter getting married to Mary Jane at all. And I simply don't understand that. I mean, that's a whole nother video going over why they think Peter would be aged up or not have interesting stories because he is married, because that's simply not true. He had some very great stories when they were both married. I mean, you can just look at JMS's run on Spider-Man. They were married then, and some people argue it's one of the greatest Spider-Man runs ever. But yeah, he's been setting this up, and there's no payoff, and we know this is his last issue. So it's just like, what the fuck was this all for? Because it's like, for example, it's like you get really hungry for something, right? You get really hungry for this burger, and someone tells you they're gonna cook you a burger, and then your mouth just starts watering because you're like, hey, like, oh, like, I'm really hungry, I want this burger. And then they cook the burger, you're smelling it, and then they eat it instead of you. It's like, what the fuck was that for then? Why'd you tell me you were doing this for me? And that's just extremely ridiculous. I don't know, man. Like, it's poor writing. I mean, the last 2 issues were poor writing. Overall, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but like Nick Spencer's run overall, I think is fine. I know there's a big divide in Spider-Man fans right now, whether they hate it or whether they enjoy it. And me personally, I think the first 50 issues of his run were really good. Particularly the first 30 issues, I think, are pretty much perfect in my opinion. But the 50 issues that he started with are great. I think they're 8 out of 10s and above. I think Hunted, I know some people don't like Hunted like after like a halfway point, but I enjoyed that story. I think what really soured me or made me lose a little bit of faith was when Spencer did Last Remains. That's when we found out that Harry was Kindred to some extent, because or Sins Rising. It was Sins Rising and Last Remains. I think they were connected. I think that we were getting this whole Kindred mystery prolonged way too much. I mean, we were past like 50 issues at this point, and we didn't find out who Kindred was, and it was getting a little bit boring because by this point we're talking about like what, 1.5-2 years into this, and we don't know who it is, and that was a bit frustrating. But then we got past that, and Last Remains wasn't too good because it was just a lot of padding, and we just had a lot of Kindred just monologuing and not doing much. So that was problematic, and I mean, the past 2 issues, like I said before, are dumb. The retcon for Sins Past, I do like the fact that Sins Past is retcon. I do like the fact that Gwen Stacy is not canonically in an event where she slept with Norman Osborn. I think that damaged her character, and if it was, precedent, it would irreparably damage her character. But I'm glad that's gone now. But aside from that, I mean, we got the whole convoluted nonsense with Kindred being like the vessels for Harry, and they're like Gabriel and Gwen. They were cloned over and over again. They kept dying, and we found out like they were created by using like an old like 90s story after Harry died. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but like Harry, after he died, became like an AI computer and uploaded his consciousness to like screw over Peter by like making robot versions of his parents to make it seem like they were alive but they weren't. Or like this whole, he orchestrated Sins Past by making Mysterio make Norman believe he slept with Gwen and making Mary Jane believe Gwen told her, which is just like, okay, so Mysterio going forward can just do whatever the fuck he wants, because you can just say like, oh, this happened? No, it didn't happen because Mysterio did this. You could literally retcon this entire story and just saying, oh no, this didn't happen because Mysterio did this shit. Like, what the fuck do you do with that now? That's a big can of worms. And besides that, I mean, just the overcomplication of like who Kindred is. Like, he could have just kept it simple that it was Harry. If it was just Harry, or like Harry coming back somehow. I mean, I would have been fine with that, man. I would have been fine with anything, man. Shit, you could have did Gwen Stacy and I'd been fine. But it's just the way they made it way too complicated just to retcon one story is insane. And then the big one that was set up since the very first issue 3 years ago didn't even get fucking resolved. And then we're moving on from Peter. We're moving to Ben Reilly, who I'm excited for Ben Reilly's run because I never read Ben Reilly as a kid, or I didn't read him in the '90s because I wasn't born yet. So I'm interested to see him in a role as being Spider-Man and not being like Scarlet Spider or the fucking dumbass evil Jackal. But it's just frustrating, like having stuff like this set up and not happen. I think that is Editorial's fault and probably because they have a track record of doing these things. For example, with Sins Past, it wasn't even supposed to be Norman Osborn who slept with Gwen Stacy. It was supposed to be Peter, and that Gabriel and Sarah were Peter's kids. But they said no, like that couldn't happen because that would make Peter too old, and which is bullshit. But anyways, we also got One More Day where Editorial got in the way of that. I mean, originally like JMS wanted Gwen Stacy to come back to life. He wanted Harry Osborn to come back to life. He wanted like certain things to happen. It just said no. Now, I don't really have an opinion on that because that's a whole another can of worms, another rant I could probably do, but no, I'm just I don't know. Overall, this comic was extremely disappointing. It's a fail, to be honest. Like, you can tell they just weren't fucking trying at this point. And I think this comic was supposed to end with Peter and Mary Jane getting married. Or at least Peter proposing. I won't say marriage, but at least Peter proposing. I mean, just literally look at the cover, bro. That's like one of the most romantic Spider-Man covers we've ever had. And even some of the variants. There's no way you can tell me that they weren't going to set up something important between their relationship. But instead we just got, okay, their relationship is even stronger now than ever. Then it's like, okay, but you literally had Peter right before Sinister War, set up for the conclusion of this story, tried to propose to her, and then it's just like, oh my god. I don't know, man. I'm hoping this next run is good. Overall, I'll still say this run was fine. I won't say it was amazing. It doesn't go up there with Stan Lee and Steve Ditko or like any of the other artists that work with Stan Lee or JMS or Dan Mateus or anyone like that, or Roger Stern. But it's just fine. It's passable. I'd say about half of this, but it's just the conclusion's really disappointing, and I hoped this would be better than it was. It definitely was not worth the $10. So yeah, I think I'm gonna call this rant over. But yeah, make sure to like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed this. If you got your blood boiling just like it did mine. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.